and broadcast here. Give me just 1 second. I'll tell you right as we're going actually live. Okay, we are live. Good morning and welcome everybody to the McLean County State of the Environment panel discussion. Thank you for joining us this morning. The premise of this discussion is essentially looking at Earth Day past, Earth Day present, Earth Day future, and progress that's been made in the decades since the original Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970, 50 years ago. And so we do have a panel of experts in different environmental subjects here assembled to discuss these issues this morning. We will be taking questions from the internet live from any of you who are watching. Those of you who are signed in Zoom as a participant, you can submit your questions via chat. Those of you who are on Facebook Live can as well just put your questions in the comments. We do have staff who are watching both of those, and we'll be assembling those questions and preparing them so when we get to the question portion of this event that we are prepared to answer as many of those as possible. So we will just start with some brief introductions and brief kind of background information on these topics and eventually get to your questions. So thank you all for joining us. And I would like to just introduce real quick here our moderator who's going to be running things for us this morning, Julie Elzanati, who has a pretty long and involved background in the environment here in Central Illinois. She was previously I believe the first energy coordinator at the Ecology Action Center. She was the first director of the Green Institute at Heartland Community College, instrumental in the creation of iGen, Illinois Green Economy Network, as well as many other accomplishments. I could go on and on. Thank you, Julie, for helping us out here today.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you so much for hosting this event today. I'm very happy to be celebrating this beautiful Earth Day with this group of people. This is wonderful. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all of the participants for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation, so let's get started. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, and that's Shannon Fulton. She has served as the Vice President of Development for the St. Louis-based StraightUp Solar since 2015. After a nearly 20-year career as an environmental hydrologist, Shannon retooled for a second career through Illinois State University's Renewable Energy Program. And then in 2013, she joined StraightUp Solar as a project designer and an installer. And recently, after moving up very quickly into the vice president's position, she opened a satellite office here in Bloomington to expand the company into Central Illinois, and they have been expanding. Shannon has served in multiple leadership roles for the Illinois Solar Energy Association, and she is also a volunteer as a solar ambassador for the We Care Solar, a nonprofit that reduces infant mortality by equipping off-grid medical clinics with solar power. She has traveled to Nepal, Uganda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe to install solar units and train local technicians. I'll turn it over to Shannon to talk about our questions today, which are how has the solar industry and the renewable energy industry changed since Earth Day 1970, and where are we today? Shannon?
Thank you, Julie. Like you, I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation on such a monumental day. You know, the importance of Earth Day has definitely grown across the world in the last few decades with insight into climate change and how it threatens our economy, our future progress, our health and safety, and our ways of life. It continues to serve as an important reminder that we are all connected to the earth and each other without exception. This growing realization, accompanied by advancement of solar technology, falling technology costs, and rising fossil fuel and nuclear generated electricity costs, lie at the root of why the solar energy industry has grown so significantly over the past decade. Earth Day also, to me, feels like it carries a lot more urgency. Earth Days of my youth felt, more like a day to celebrate nature versus a call to action to change our behavior or suffer the consequences. Going solar is one way that people can change their behavior, gain control of how energy is being produced by installing their own solar energy plant on their property. Additionally, the solar industry has grown up over the years. The environmental movement has always had this fire and this passion and this intellectual knowledge. And in recent years, the environmental movement and the solar industry in particular has figured out how to blaze a path through smart legislative action to really make things happen and to engage public officials in making change. So, I do think those are the areas of progress in solar in particular on the legislative front that I think are really making it possible to make real change in the US and really, across the world. The current state of things, both, prior to the COVID pandemic, are largely positive. When we view one end of the spectrum in a country such as Zimbabwe, for example, where I just was with We Care Solar, solar is literally saving lives there through its application in health clinics, specifically maternity wards. This country has been hard hit by climate change, very specifically. They talk about it there very specifically as having a negative impact with things that you can actually point to that are happening day to day in this country. They're suffering from dire water, energy, and food shortages as a direct result of climate change. They're feeling it more forcefully than we do here. Here in Illinois, if we bring it back home, we had, prior to the COVID pandemic, one of the fastest growing solar energy job markets in the country, in the Midwest, right here. And we were a leader in solar energy job growth in recent years. Nationally, some of the highlights, as at the end of 2018, the US had enough solar installed, 64.2 gigawatts, to power 12.3 million American homes. Solar energy, although it accounts only for 1.6% of the total US electricity generation, it offsets 70 million metric tons of carbon dioxide every year, equivalent to planting almost 1.2 billion trees. It has ranked first or second in electrical capacity added to the US grid since 2013. Solar panel efficiency has increased from 6% in 1954 to over 40% on high efficiency panels today. The price of solar has fallen over 70% just since 2010. 90% of adults say they favor more solar panel farms, and 235 mayors representing all of 50 states have signed Environment America's Mayors for Solar Energy letter. There's broad support for the uptake of more solar. Solar photovoltaic installer is the fastest growing job in America. At least it was prior to COVID. And monumentally, big oil giants are going solar. They made 109 deals with solar farms between 2002 and 2017. COVID definitely makes it harder to fight for the environment, and for solar in particular. Though solar energy advancement has been delayed in Illinois and across the country due to COVID, there have definitely been cutbacks, layoffs, canceled and delayed projects, even in our own company. But I'm definitely bullish about the solar movement and the continued progress of the industry. I see it continuing to flourish once we move as a state and nation into a safer operating environment. Though the timeline is unknown, I expect progress to begin again in the fall, most likely. So I'm very positive about how we come out of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shannon. During your presentation, we received several great questions, and just to let everybody on the webinar know that we are saving up all of the questions to the end again. So thank you, Shannon, for that wonderful update. And we'll move on now to our next panelist, Todd Shoemaker. Todd is a second generation owner of the Midwest Fiber Recycling Company. Todd's father, Ron Shumaker, purchased a small recycling company 30 years ago in Decatur. And since then, Midwest Fiber has grown quite dramatically. And now they operate 6 processing facilities, which are located in Peoria, Decatur, Champaign, and Normal, Illinois, as well as Terre Haute, Indiana. 5 of these processing facilities primarily focus on source-separated recyclables from commercial and industrial customers. However, the one in Normal, which is a single-stream material recovery facility, is what their processing facility is here in Normal. Todd has served on the board of directors for the Illinois Recycling Association, and he currently oversees the municipal recycling programs and business recycling programs at Midwest Fiber. Todd?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. I also like to thank Michael Brown and the EAC for putting this together. Obviously, probably the format's a bit different than most of us have had on previous Earth Days, where maybe we're out and about doing community education, possibly meeting with 7- and 8-year-olds at schools and doing different projects. But I appreciate that we have to work with what we've been left up to, and I love the format, so I appreciate it. Looking forward to not only talking briefly about recycling and where we've been at for the last 50 years, but also hearing from the other panelists in their areas of expertise. So, and kind of putting this together, to be honest with you, I had to go back and do a little bit of research for the 1970s, as fortunately that was just the year I was being born in. So, you know, and it was pretty interesting for me to really see in the last 50 years how far recycling has come, because what you do find when you work, at least in you work in a business and on a business for so long, you really don't see the changes that are happening in and around you until you really sit down and look at it. And, you know, when we trace, going back 50 years ago, when we trace the roots of recycling, really in the 70s was definitely a time where recycling laid some of the grassroots foundations to where we got to today. So it was a very pivotal time for recycling. One of the first, as we saw, single-use packaging was being introduced, and consumers and manufacturers have been paying attention to the implications and the lack of infrastructure for collection and recyclables of those products, which really led to the first glass bottle deposit that was in 1970 in Oregon. But it also led corporations and public interest groups to form. Some of those groups that have survived or still around is Keeping America Beautiful, and the Container Corporation of America running its competition for a logo to put on recycled products to identify as recycling, which, as we all know today and still see, was the Chasing Arrows. Unfortunately, that poor college student got paid $2,500 for that logo, and is still being used on recycling everywhere today, and has become a primary focus. But you know, really, as we trace back to the 1970s, really most of the effort at that time was about reducing littering, and the recycling really revolved around newspaper and aluminum cans. But like I mentioned, recycling was growing, single-use packaging was growing, and as a society, our views and beliefs were changing on how we purchase products and discarded products. So in the 1980s, as we move forward here, you know, really that's where we can trace back the first curbside recycling program was implemented. As you can imagine, that was not nearly as simplified as it is today with single stream recycling, but it was traced back to New Jersey. You know, at that time, curbside recycling was set out at the curb. It had to be put into multiple bins, and you had to have multiple trucks come down the street. So really not very sophisticated, required a lot of labor by the collection companies or the municipalities. But it was really the start of people focusing on that recycling from the household, not just from businesses. And I think with that is where we saw that really start to take hold, but also start to generate these large volumes of recyclings that's now being collected in the United States from curbside collection. So in the 90s, the concept of single stream recycling was introduced. As a processor of recyclable, we like to blame curbside recycling on the hauler or the municipality, that they chose to do it for the efficiencies in collection. But ultimately, we have all seen the rewards of larger participation, simplicity at the house, reduced space that's needed, and reduced capital in collection. So typically those materials today kind of fall in the categories of paper, plastic, glass, aluminum, and tin cans. Unfortunately, with single stream recycling, that does bring the potential for more contamination than we've seen in the past, which is kind of really where our industry is at today. And probably the focus that we've had in the last 24 months is looking at contamination and how those things would be recycled. But what did happen in the 90s is that we've also started to shift collection of recyclables. Once they were processed, really were transitioned to no longer were we reliant on just domestic paper mills and domestic consumers of these products, but we started shipping these materials really all over the world. And while the topic is about recycling in McLean County, we really can't have the topic without really thinking about the implications in the world economy. Over the last 50 years, we've seen a lot of transition. Glass has moved to aluminum cans, increase of plastic and single-use consumption, which was not something that was very prevalent in the 80s. We're seeing a large reduction in newspaper consumption with over 50% reduction in newspaper usage and recycling, which was a very common item recycled in the last 10 years. We're also seeing lightweightness of packaging. So that's not just changing glass to plastics, but also the single-use packaging is getting more efficient. It's thinner, it's lighter, and they've also just designed it better. We're moving away from domestic markets back into international markets, as I mentioned. We also see the increase in uses of pouches for liquid packaging. When you walk down the soup aisle today, no longer is 100% of it cans of tin cans, but there's a lot of pouches that are being used as well. So, that's one thing in the recycling market that we have to continue to look at and evolve to is the packaging requirements. And unfortunately, during this, we've also seen the increase of greenwashing, which is where companies are stating things are recyclable, but oftentimes add confusion to the user. If it can go in my recycling bin, if it can be recycling, and in reality, oftentimes those things don't have recycling options. So, where are we at today? I think specifically when we look back in McLean County, both Bloomington and Normal have very robust curbside recycling programs, which both of them boasting well over 50% participation. Additionally, we see a high percentage in the community Dropbox programs that's located in the Normal, but does support the whole community in the county. We also have the new multifamily recycling ordinance that went into place last year, helping to provide an avenue for residents in multifamily housing and access to recycling bin. I think that's going to be a trend that probably continues. Material values have been reduced over the last 24 months and where we're at today. Ironically, because of the COVID-19, a lot of the byproducts that we collect, though, are in high demand. As you can imagine, a lot of the paper is being used for tissue and towel manufacturing, and they just can't get enough of that product. The supply chain lines for manufacturing oftentimes start in recycling, and ISRI had just suggested that almost 40% of all raw materials that go into new material manufacturing have been recycled material. So we do become a vital standpoint from that standpoint. So that market has changed pretty significantly here. We continue to see, processing costs continue to increase. And part of that is just because materials are changing. No longer are we using glass jars, but we're using plastic. So we have to pull a lot of more plastic jars compared to glass. And we continue to see those things, but we definitely see, while the COVID-19 situation for recycling, we think is a small blip on the radar, there's definitely a lot of long-term optimism to move forward with a lot of domestic improvements in the recycling streams for the materials going forward. So we're excited about that.
Thank you very much, Todd. That was an excellent update on recycling, and it was really fascinating to hear how much it's changed over 50 years. So we'll move on now to our next panelist, Michael Brown. He has served as the Executive Director of the Ecology Action Center for over 12 years. Started in that position in November of 2007. His diverse background in environmental work includes training of volunteers in ecological monitoring for the Illinois EcoWatch, service as a Peace Corps volunteer at Purin National Park in Bulgaria, management of a 320-acre educational park for the Peoria Park District, work in environmental health with the Peoria City and County Health Department, and restoration of natural areas for Peoria wilds. Michael is an essential environmentalist. Yay, Michael. He recently completed a 9-year term on the board of directors for the Parklands Foundation, acting as chair of their critical stewardship efforts. And he also currently serves on the Illinois State University for Community Engagement and Service Learning Community Consulting Board. Michael, thank you for all of your great work. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. So, and just to preface this, the Ecology Action Center, we work in all of these different, topic areas, but just today I'm going to be talking most about climate, although all these topic areas do really tie into climate. And so, of course, if we go back to 1970, an original, Earth Day, at that point, climate was not really on most people's radar, although it was on the radar of some people. As we look into the 80s, it was growing in visibility, where we had scientists already at that point, testifying to Congress the need to do something about climate change, as they saw increasing levels of carbon emissions accumulating from the use of fossil fuels, from that ongoing use of, a century of fossil fuels. And so it really wasn't until, more recent decades that this has really become to the forefront as, one of the most critical environmental issues that we need to be addressing. And of course, just the basics here being, the carbon emissions from fossil fuel combustion is creating, heavier concentrations in the atmosphere of carbon for hundreds of thousands of years. While there are natural fluctuations, we never went above 300 parts per million. Whereas as of yesterday, we're at 421 parts per million, and we've been, in the 400s now for a while. We've been above 350 for a while, and that's kind of a target area that scientists long ago decided that's where we need to hold things if we really want to avoid significant changes to our environment. And we're well above that at this point. And so locally, the Ecology Action Center has been working on this for several years, and that we've done multiple greenhouse gas emission inventories to quantify, what our output of emissions are, what sort of sources are they coming from, what sort of activities, so that we might, work towards reduction of those emissions. And that's where we are right now. Currently, we're in the development process of a collaborative community clean air plan to help reduce those carbon emissions, as well as ozone emissions, which also come from combustion of fossil fuels and other sources too. And so that's kind of the state of things as it stands at the moment. Obviously, we need to make a lot more progress on this. There hasn't been a lot of national leadership in the United States. Illinois in particular is working to definitely reduce carbon emissions through multiple efforts that we might be able to discuss later if we have time. But here locally, we're trying to do our part, and there's a long history here in Bloomington Normal of environmental initiatives, many of which that can help reduce carbon emissions.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. All right. Moving on to our next panelist, Krista Kirkham. She is an aquatic ecologist for the Illinois chapter of the Nature Conservancy. She has a Bachelor of Science from Eastern Illinois University and a Master of Science from Illinois State University. For the past 13 years, she has worked in the headwaters of the Mackinac River to implement and monitor constructed wetlands and other agricultural best management practices. She works closely with local farmers, landowners, USDA offices, soil and water conservation districts, agricultural groups, universities, and other NGOs to reduce nutrient loss from agricultural lands, specifically from tile drainage. Krista lives in Bloomington and maintains a visiting researcher position at Illinois State University. She has been a board member of Parkland's Foundation for 9 years and is the current president of the Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Society. Thank you, Krista. Turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. And thank you to the Ecology Action Center for hosting us all today. It's really an honor to be a part of this. And 50 years for Earth Day is certainly something to celebrate, whether we're running around or on Zoom. It's all a good thing. So my section here is to talk a bit about water and the progress that's been made over the past 50 years. And I'm going to start pretty broad, and then I'll narrow it down to what's been happening in Illinois. So Earth Day was started in 1970, and so was the Environmental Protection Agency. So there was a lot of energy in the early 70s regarding the environmental movement. So we saw a lot of action happening with legislation, activism, et cetera. There was really a lot going on. I think probably the biggest legislation to come out of this period was the Clean Water Act in 1972. This was really the first big piece of national legislation to go out to recognize that there were issues happening specifically from point sources. So these are, direct pipe influences of pollutants to our water bodies. So that came out in 1972 to restore and maintain our healthy and clean waters. And then it was revamped in 1977 to specifically regulate the discharge of untreated wastewater from municipalities, industries, and businesses into our adjacent waterways. So this is where the actual teeth kind of came into. So at that point, there was a lot of work going on regarding how they were going to be applied for permits to do this, including the Npdes Permit, which stands for I always forget this, I have to read it every time, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So that's really where wastewaters had to come in, get a permit to be able to do their discharge there. And there was also money set aside for wastewater treatment plants to build more infrastructure, whether that's green or gray, to be able to deal with the waste that was coming out. So that was probably the biggest piece of legislation that happened at that time. In 1985, the Farm Bill was out that year, and this may not seem like a direct correlation to water quality, but this was the first time that the Farm Bill had a conservation title associated to it. So this was the beginning of the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, and also the Wetlands Reserve Program, or WRP. And although those were programs that were set aside, so basically farmers and landowners were paid to put their land out of production and had significant benefits to erosion protection and habitat, that certainly had an influence on water quality as well, specifically in the Midwestern and Plain States area there. And then in 1986, during that administration, we had the Safe Drinking Water Act come through, which specifically protected aquifers from pollutants and mandated some state-developed critical wellhead protections. And then really drinking water protections for such heavy metals such as lead came out at this time. So this was really an important step to put some protections around our drinking water. And more recently, we've seen there's been a lot of improvements with point sources, but there's been less progress on our non-point sources. So these are basically pollutants that come in that don't have a direct, obvious point of entry. And a lot of that is stemmed towards agriculture these days, specifically in the Midwest. And so in 2008, the Mississippi River Gulf of Mexico Hypoxia Task Force was developed, and that was driven by EPA. And this, out of this commission was an action plan to move forward to try to reduce specifically nitrogen and phosphorus levels coming from the Mississippi watershed down to the Gulf of Mexico, where our hypoxia issue is, or the dead zone, as it's more commonly referred to. And there were several action steps laid out in that. And specifically what happened from that is that Midwestern states came up with their own plans to be able to try to directly address the goals that were established in this 2008 action plan. And there was a big lofty goal. There was a goal of 45% reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus to the Gulf by 2050, I believe. So every state came out with objectives of how to do that. And Illinois came out with theirs in 2015. It's called the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. And it had interim goals of reducing nitrogen by 15% by 2025, and then phosphorus by 25%. And it laid out specific ways that it could do that by looking at conservation practices and also ways that urban areas can help reduce their inputs as well. So the current state of things, there's certainly some work to be done regarding some of our contributions with nutrients. Illinois unfortunately battles Iowa often as the largest contributor of nitrogen and phosphorus to the Gulf. And so we certainly have some work to do there regarding our non-point discharge. But the good news is that there's a lot of energy around this right now. We have a lot of groups coming together to partner on ways that farmers, landowners can work together to maintain yields, but still see reductions in loss that's happening downstream. And there's a lot of energy around specifically Chicago in ways that they can reduce the phosphorus through the Illinois River. So I think we're in a good spot. We'll see how things work out from the COVID pandemic. It's kind of hard to say right now. I think there's some concern around reduced funding for some of these types of things, but for now, I think progress is still moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Okay, our next panelist is Tara Brockman. She is the fourth of 5 generations working and living on a Central Illinois family farm. She is a James Beard nominated author whose work has appeared in the Chicago Tribune, Civil Eats, Edible Chicago, Epicurious, and the Christian Century. In 2000, she founded The Land Connection, an educational nonprofit that trains farmers in regenerative agriculture and helps them to build healthy, community-based food systems. When she's not working, writing, or speaking about food and farming, you're likely to find her working on her brother Henry's vegetable farm or on her sister Teresa's fruit farm. Tara, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Can everybody hear me? So I'm going to try to be, because I know we're probably running out of time and I'd like to hear what people's questions might be. But what Julie said is true. I should be working on my brother's farm right now. We're having a huge transplant marathon to get things in the ground before the rain that's coming. And in fact, to give the little bit of the historical part, and I'll be very brief, I was alive. I was 12 years old in the first Earth Day. And as Shannon said, it was more, as I recall, of a celebratory, let's get out in the sunshine and the flowers and praise nature. And what somebody else, I believe it was Todd, said, it was also very much on recycling. And it was about sort of doing our bit personally in our homes. And I think that's still part of what we can do. And I'll talk a little bit about that in relation to food, but it's also what Shannon said about, and maybe some other people said about legislative actions. We did have the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. They did an immense amount of good. Rivers were on fire. We had to do something. And I think hopefully we're getting to a sense of urgency today because of climate change, because of COVID related things as well, where we might have that same sense of urgency. Again, it's just a different situation, I think, in our government, which is buy-in for more large corporations and people with a lot of lobbying power, more than it is for buy-in for the people, although we have the power to change that. So I'll just say that from my family farming history around the time of the first Earth Day and prior to that, as all farms were sort of ecologically based, they were diverse. They weren't as reliant on chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, herbicides. My grandparents, my great-grandparents' farms were what we would call today organic. It's because that was basically the only option. And so we had a huge change between the first Earth Day and today in the area of food production and agriculture, which has been more and more concentrated, larger farms, and then the monocropping, which requires more fertilizer, more chemical inputs. And so I think that the story of agriculture and food systems from the first Earth Day to today has been bifurcated in a sense. We got bigger and bigger, we got more chemical intensive, we have more soil loss. You know, we do battle Iowa for the privilege, very questionable privilege, of being #1 in soil loss and #1 in pollution that goes down to the dead zone. So on the one hand, over these years, farms have gotten bigger and more damaging to the environment, to human health. On the other hand, we've had this growing movement of small farms, organic farms, not all small, by the way. And the more growing awareness that you can get good food from your local farmers in your local community. And I think that's been an area of positive development. So on the one hand, Krista and other people are working on all the problems that have been generated over these past 50 years. But on the other hand, I think consumers and personally in our own homes, we can grow some of our own food. A lot of more people are doing that right now. I know because my sister sells plant starts and she said it's been crazy how many people want plant starts this year compared to previous years. Thank you, COVID. And then the other thing is that people can, you know, purchase from local food producers through a community supported agriculture, CSA. We have a number of options throughout McLean County and further. At the same time, we have wonderful options like our local co-op with the Green Top Grocery and the Common Ground, and even some other stores which are carrying local foods now. So I think, again, on the one hand, we've gotten bigger, we've gotten dirtier, we've gotten more problematic. On the other hand, we've gotten smaller, we've gotten more local. And I think, again, COVID has brought us to the awareness that when the store shelves go empty, because of the mass global distribution systems that have kind of failed, where do you get your food? You get it from your local folks who can still bring it into your local co-op. So, so I think this is an opportunity at this moment, the COVID thing, but also the 50th anniversary, to take a good look. And I can also go into how the local farms are also better for the CO2 sequestration and climate change impacts. I don't want to go off on that right now. So I'll just say that at this present moment, I think we're at an inflection point and we can take advantage of it, and we can do things in our personal lives and in our legislative lives. Thank you, Illinois Stewardship Alliance and other people. And we can get some legislation done that might be better for their next generation. Thanks.
All right, well, this is what happens when the internet is live. So until Julie comes back in, I'm going to play the part of moderator. We're going to start out. Oop, Julie, are you back? Let me know when you're back, because I was going to take over for you until you got back. Can you hear us? Turn your microphone. Your microphone is off. I'm unmuting. Okay.
Am I unmuted now?
Now you're good. Yes. All right.
We had to add a little bit of excitement to your webinar. I apologize.
Not a problem.
My battery died.
Oh no. So do you have access to our questions from our people at home?
No.
Okay, I'm just going to take over here. All right. So let's start out with, we have a question. Sarah
Okay.
Zoom is asking Shannon, can you give us an update on Illinois' Clean Energy Jobs Act?
Yes, so I'm not as familiar with CEJA, as it's called. There are definitely opportunities from various groups to pull together and pass another energy legislative package. I think we had really good traction prior to COVID. I think the possibility for passing such a package in 2020 has been reduced greatly because of the other priorities that we have now. So I don't know the status of CJA specifically, but I do have hope for being able to get something passed later in the year or early 2021.
Okay. I'm going to take one here. I see there's a question from Jade on Zoom. He's asking about any plans for a curbside compost program. And so Todd might want to add to this, but I will just attempt an answer right now. So the economics of curbside composting are not particularly good. Midwest Fiber previously was running a commercial compost pickup program, which now actually has been taken over by an operation in Bartonville, south of Peoria. And so Midwest Fiber is not part of that. But just curbside composting is most economically feasible in your large urban areas, especially on the east and west coasts, where the cost of landfilling are so prohibitively expensive because they have to ship stuff, sometimes even states away because of the large urban areas and development. There aren't any landfills left nearby that are open still. So it's unlikely that we'll have curbside composting for residents anytime in the near future. However, something we're hoping to launch today, and I'm just going to give you guys a preview. Don't tell anyone because this is inside information. We just have the whole internet listening. But we are working to launch a kiosk-based compost program for local residents. That will be a subscription-based program for a small annual fee. People will be able to take their food scraps for composting to this kiosk. There hopefully will be a couple of these kiosks in town. And essentially, this is even better than backyard composting in that you can take meats, dairies, other things that you cannot easily compost in a backyard composting environment.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
I can take over now.
Wonderful. You go
Okay.
right ahead.
So we have a question for you from Sarah on Facebook. She's asking, we've seen a reduction in air pollution as a result of so many people being off the roads as a result of the COVID pandemic. I'm wondering if you could talk about that more for Illinois, locally in McLean County. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts as far as measuring that, and are we able to even measure that as a result of COVID-19?
That's an excellent question. And actually, anyone who's subscribed to the EAC newsletter will see just a little blurb on that in a special Earth Day edition we put out this morning. And so we are looking very closely into that. And it's fascinating. This is a real world live experiment that we're witnessing that we wouldn't have been able to recreate by other means. And so yes, our local air quality data for the past couple months is showing a significant decrease in ground level ozone emissions, which also come from fossil fuel sources. And so we're hoping to be able to correlate with that ozone drop the correlated drop in carbon emissions as well that would come from those same fossil fuel sources. And so yes, definitely less traffic on the road means less emissions overall. So yeah, air quality right now in Bloom to Normal is probably the best that it's been in quite a while. We've been borderline for non-attainment for air quality standards, specifically for ozone. And so this is a positive development. Obviously, it's not permanent as it is, but we are trying to, at the same time, correlate these emissions reductions with how much traffic reduction is there that's caused these emissions reduction, so that we can use that as a model in our upcoming clean air plan as a strategy. How much do we have to incentivize other means of transportation or carbon-free transportation like EV vehicles or things like that in order to get this level of air quality improvement, both carbon emission reduction and ozone reduction. So yeah, that's a fascinating thing, and great that we can see that in real time right now. So very good question.
Great. Thank you. This question is for Todd, and it is about recycling in restaurants here in McLean County. And they're wondering, I'm gonna add to this, do the restaurants here in McLean County recycle? If they don't, why not? And I'm gonna add to that and ask, what about large businesses in general? Is there any potential in the near future that we might move to something like single stream, not just single stream recycling, but everything being like in some countries where it's just all sorted. So you throw everything together.
Right. No, I appreciate the question. I think, I don't know the percentages, but I do think a large number of restaurants do recycle, specifically like the cardboard that they collect. One challenge that we have when we deal with restaurants is the types of products that they generate for waste and relying on the public to do their separation of it. It's not uncommon at all that you can walk into a restaurant, at least me in the recycling industry, I see one that says recycling and one that says landfill. And we see a lot of cross-contamination in systems like that from the commercial side because there's just a lot of confusion. When people see a plastic fork, they think, well, it's plastic, it can go in the recycle bin. Or maybe it's used paper towels or paper plates or aluminum foil with large amounts of food waste on it. So recycling inside the restaurants is a bit challenging. And I think restaurants that have tried to do that have struggled with that. But I do think a lot of businesses are recycling things in the back side of the restaurant, in the prep area. In regards to large businesses, I mean, I think we've seen that over the years. When my father got into the business, really the only businesses who recycled with us were the ones who were getting paid. They wanted money for their recycling. And that shift has happened probably in the last 10 or 15 years, where now that people have access to recycling at home, they want access to recycling at work. And we probably have a customer base, and there's other companies in McLean County that collect recyclables as well. But we probably have a customer base of 300 customers, commercial, small to medium-sized customers that we pick up on routes. Oftentimes you don't notice us because the vehicles have the appearance of a garbage collection truck, but oftentimes we're behind these businesses picking up cardboard, paper, plastics, and in most cases, those are commingled together now.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have another question, two questions. I'm going to put them together here for Shannon. One is, can you please give an update on how the Clean Energy Jobs Act is going? And in addition to that, if somebody here in McLean County would like to install or participate in solar, but they don't own property, how might they do that?
Yeah, we talked briefly about the CJEP bill when you're offline. So
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. I think people are up to speed on that. But with respect to community solar, there are community solar developments coming online slowly but surely. There were, I think a little over 30 projects that were approved downstate in Ameren territory for folks to subscribe in. So that is happening. I believe there is, I wish I had come prepared with this, but there is a website, probably more than one, that you can go to see where all of the community solar developments are happening in the state, and then subscribe. I'm not sure if maybe Larissa or Michael have more information on that, like where you can go. It might be at the CUB Citizens Utility Board website, perhaps. But there is a resource, and once the next person starts to answer a question, I can search that and then put it in the chat if I can track down that website for folks. So definitely subscribing to a community solar development. If you are in Ameren, if you take your energy from Ameren or an alternate supplier like Constellation or something, anybody who's not in a cooperative can get access to community solar subscriptions, and those are just beginning to become available as projects are built.
So I've just, Larissa is here invisibly, and I've just asked her if she wants to pop in to address that other part. She might be tied up with some other inquiries, but yeah, if she does, we can accommodate that. Oh, there she is.
Surprise. I was trying to find that, the site that Shannon was talking about too. I think it's like Community Solar Hub or something to that effect. But yes, people are going to start seeing community solar being marketed directly to them through things in the mail. And if anyone ever has questions about whether or not something seems legitimate, or if they have questions about how the process works, they're always welcome to reach out to the Ecology Action Center, and we can look over things that people are getting and help people navigate that system. Some of the things that I've been hearing about for community solar options are basically you're getting your energy supply from a community solar array instead of from your traditional supplier. And most of the places that are offering community solar are going to do it at about a 20% reduction on that supply rate than what you would be getting from your utility. So it's a really great way to invest in renewable energy on the grid here in Illinois, and also maybe save a little bit of money on your energy bill. So I will, I'll find that site and I'll pop it in the chat, and yeah.
Great. Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Shannon. I want to say that just doing a time check, we are coming up on the hour here. And so I know some people might have to drop off. We wanted to let you know that we are, I believe, recording this. And I think that will be available. So what we do want to do is go ahead and continue answering a few questions here. So we will go over the hour. But we've gotten some really good questions, so we don't want to cut that off. And then after we finish with the questions, which will just be a few more minutes, we'll go ahead and give the panelists each a few more minutes to just briefly close up and talk a little bit about the future and what they hope will happen coming up. So I'd like to, these questions are for Krista. Krista, I'm going to combine two questions here for you. One is, why did the Nature Conservancy choose to work in the headwaters of the Mackinac River? And if, in addition to that, if you live in the Mackinac River watershed or in an urban area here in McLean County, which I believe is more than one watershed, how would somebody help prevent stormwater runoff? What are the best practices that we as residents can do?
Sure, thanks, Julie. So the first question, why did Nature Conservancy start working in the Mackinac? That was actually, so it's a long-term project at this point. Started working out in the headwaters region back in the late 90s. And that was a little bit of a shift for Nature Conservancy back then, because we're an organization that typically works like a land trust, which would buy property, natural areas, keep it protected, et cetera. And that's still our bread and butter. But to work in this area was really that true partnership of working with farmers and landowners in the area to figure out, what could be done at a small watershed scale to see changes within our water quality, and also determine which practices are the most effective for that. But in addition to that, the Mackinac was chosen because despite all the pressures that it receives from agriculture and urban, it's still one of our highest quality rivers in Illinois. And some of that is due to the large part of very good protection along the Mackinac from NGOs like Parklands or stewards of farmers that are doing a great job with some conservation practices. The Mackinac also receives quite a bit of groundwater influence, so that helps kind of dilute some of the nutrients coming down as well. But it has some quite high levels of fish and mussel diversity, and it's just got a lot of interesting things going on. So if you haven't paddled the Mackinac, I recommend you do that. And for those of you who may live within the watershed, I'll specifically talk about people perhaps in Bloomington Normal. So this is interesting. So if you live in Bloomington, you get your drinking water from Lake Bloomington or Evergreen Lake, which are reservoirs from Money Creek and 6 Mile Creek. But if you live in Normal, you're getting your water from an aquifer. So we are getting our drinking water from two different sources, but we have a combined wastewater that goes to Sugar Creek, which goes to the Sangamon River. So our area is taking water, consuming water and releasing water to different sources. So it's important to consider where it's coming from and also where it's being discharged. So I give a lot of credit to the EAC on education in this area for people to be able to really your do's and don'ts when it comes to helping to reduce what's happening coming off your lawns, what's coming off in stormwater, et cetera. There's been there's a lot of great tips on the website, but I'll list a few. One, if you fertilize your lawn, first maybe reconsider that and consider how much you're putting on, because it's been shown that like per cubic foot that homeowners tend to put a lot more fertilizer on than the agriculture sector, the conventional agriculture system. So that's something to look at. Keep your spills to a minimum. Like, don't directly pour things down the water drain, of course, your motor oils, things like that. If you can, leave some taller grass next to where your wastewater would go. That would certainly help filter it, slow things down. And little things, think about pollinator in your own yard. That's a great opportunity to see butterflies, have some birds come in. It also does a great job of sequestering water. So there's a lot of little things that you can do within your lawn as well. So, otherwise, go to EAC. They got a bunch of tips.
Thank you, Krista. Okay, we have a question for Tara, and this is it's multiple components here. So I'm wondering, how has COVID-19 impacted local farmers in terms of their ability to reach customers? How are they preparing? Because I mean, this is just the beginning, right? So we know this is going to go on for a little bit longer. So what are the thoughts? How are farmers dealing with this, especially with the farmers markets? And then in addition to that, is there an opportunity here, since I've seen, like you said, a lot of people are setting up raised beds in their backyards, people in neighborhoods I wouldn't expect to ever see that in. So I'm wondering what might be some educational opportunities or some opportunities at this time to really raise awareness of food, because that is clearly one of the most essential things that we've seen happen here as part of COVID.
I'm muted. Okay, am I back?
Okay. Yes.
So, great questions. Yes, COVID has had I guess I'll answer your question about how it's affecting farmers and farmers markets, et cetera, only on the basis of these smaller farms, direct to consumer. I don't yet know what effects it's going to have on the larger industrial production of corn and soybeans in our area. Maybe somebody else could answer that question. But from the food perspective, meaning fruits, vegetables, meats, eggs, and additionally some small grains and other things, there's two ways to go on this. One is that all the farmers I'm aware of are making changes to their distribution plans to be COVID aware and safe, both on the farms and in the way they get the produce to the people. There has been some issues and we're working through them, but I would say that the Illinois Farmers Market Association has been fabulous and way ahead of the curve in preparing guidance. And if anybody wants to go to the Illinois Farmers Market Association website, you can pick up these guidance forms as PDFs for consumers, for farmers markets, for farmers market managers. So they've put together some really good stuff, and they've taken what they've learned from New York City's green market, from Los Angeles, these larger cities that already have had huge impacts of COVID, more than we have right here so far, and found ways that people can still go out to their farmers market safely. You don't have to order from Amazon and get it delivered to your door. In fact, we would encourage you not to do that, because you don't know who touched that and sneezed on that before it appeared at your door. It didn't magically drop from some pristine location onto your doorstep. It was touched by numerous people at numerous stages before it got to your doorstep. So we want people to know that we're taking actions on the farm, at the farmers markets, to make you safe. And all those are listed. I won't go into them on the Illinois Farmers Market Association. Some farmers markets are choosing not to open, or to open with very limited access. And that's of course up to local health departments. Even though the Governor Pritzker declared farmers markets to be an essential service, just like a grocery store or a pharmacy. In fact, they are a grocery store and a pharmacy in one, because food is medicine. And that's the best medicine sometimes. So we're moving ahead. We're going to try to provide people with the food they need. But the farmers are in a delicate situation in that a lot of people are immunocompromised. A lot of people don't want to leave their house and go to the farmer's market. So we're really pushing CSAs and trying to get people to commit to buying a whole season share of vegetables or fruits or whatever the product is. And some people are doing the door-to-door delivery. Some people can't because of the size of their operation. But either way, there's ways to still get fresh, local, healthy food, which you especially need for your immune system at this time. And to get it from your local farms, support your local farms. Don't get it from California or somewhere else. And so I would say, again, it's this opportunity that we have, thanks to COVID, that we can find those farms. It's very easy now with Google, and to sign up for a CSA or to go to your local farmers market, or both, and keep supporting those people, because those are the folks who are going to feed you throughout this crisis and into the future. I can talk more about other aspects if you want, but I don't want to take too much time. So it's a great opportunity, and we're moving ahead to feed our community.
Thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. And to all of the panelists, thank you very much for your contributions today and for your insights. And before I go into our final question, Michael, is there anything, other questions, or Larissa, that maybe others have asked that I maybe missed?
Let me glance real quick here, or Larissa can pop in because she's more paying attention to that, I think, than I am. And so if she doesn't pop in, I'm going to take that as a no.
Okay.
Because I've lost.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just take that as a no, and yes, move on.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful conversation, great updates. And in closing, we want to ask each of our panelists to give a very brief update, insights. Where do you think we are going in the next 10 to 20 years with the environmental movement? Where do you want us to go for your topic area? We'll go ahead and go through the panelists in the order that we started. So who's first?
I'll go.
Oh, thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, so in the very nearest future, you know, I'm confident the solar industry will restart as we come out of the pandemic. You know, Illinois has a really strong solar incentive program. This will help our state prevail. You know, the solar energy industry here is both a key job creator and economic growth opportunity for the state. I think we're beginning to recognize that more and more. There had been great and has been great interest in the Future Energy Jobs Act that passed in 2016, so much so that uptake outperformed or outpaced available funding. There was a question earlier about the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is intended to address part of that issue. So I'm hopeful that in the near future, we will pass new legislation either in 2020 or early 2021 to support the necessary changes to continue to support solar project development in the state. That needs to happen, or we will see actually a cliff in the solar job capacity in Illinois. So we need to make changes there. But in general, in the next 10 years, you know, solar will continue to grow across the country. I have no doubt about that. It's unfortunately been politicized quite heavily, renewable energy in general and environmental policy in general. So what happens with the next administration will make a big difference. I mean, I think we have to realize that reality. It's dictated a lot by politics, unfortunately. I think one key improvement that has come out of the pandemic that we're dealing with is that people are more aware of the ability to gain efficiencies through the digital space. And I think solar permitting could see significant improvement in efficiency from a governmental perspective. The shelter-in-place applications have forced governmental agencies to continue business in a different way. And I think that will be beneficial to the solar industry in the future. That will help bring down our costs, frankly, if we can gain efficiencies on the permitting side. But big picture, notable changes, I see a bigger uptake in electrical vehicles and charging infrastructure, solar finance, and accessibility for low income and environmental justice, people living in environmental justice areas. I do think that will continue to gain traction. And I fully expect storage to become more mainstream as efficiencies increase, technology costs come down, and traditional electricity costs increase.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Okay. Todd?
Yeah, so anticipating what recycling is going to look like in the next 20 years is challenging, or I guess I'd say impossible. So short term, I do think we've seen a lot of new investment in the U.S. To become more reliant on these robust collection streams that we've formed, where historically we've relied on international trade for those materials. I think we've seen that in the Midwest with several older paper mills that have been shuttered or idled that traditionally used to run off of virgin wood pulp that are being transitioned into running recycled fiber because of the material that is available right now. I do have concerns about some items that are in our recycling streams right now that in some areas of the country are looking to be removed, specifically glass. It becomes a declining market. It's the one item in the stream that has to be paid to be recycled. But right now we believe still important. But we do see that trend happening in some areas of the country and even some areas in the Midwest. And those items are being diverted to the landfill. We're not a proponent of that, but definitely that could be happening. I think the other trend we're going to see is that we're going to see continued lightweightness of the materials coming at your curb. So in the past, when your bin was full, you used to weigh X, but now your bins are being filled with lighter weight materials. So I think recycling is going to start from a residential perspective is going to have to be measured by something different than how many tons did a community recycle, because tons isn't going to be the ultimate measure. We're filling bins at home now more with boxes, lightweight plastics. So they all have a huge environmental impact, but by weight, they don't seem as much. So it gives this unclear vision that recycling programs aren't successful as they were, where actually they're more successful as a volume standpoint. We're actually collecting more rather than less. So that's a change that I'm interested to see. I will say that I do think, our industry over the years has always been a relatively mom and pop, individually owned. And we have seen probably over the last 10 years, a lot of the larger national companies get involved in it, such as the Waste Managements, Republic Services, Advanced Disposal. And I think they bring recycling a little bit more to the forefront. So they can get that message out on a national level a little bit easier than we can. So I think that's been beneficial. But I think the next step is really is we have to attack this education component of it. And I think Bloomington Normal is a little bit unique, but in most communities we operate within, there is a real dilemma of who is responsible for that education. Is it the processor? Is it the collector? Or is it the municipality? And where are those funds going to come from to do that? So that's going to be an interesting trend to see where that shakes out, ideally in the next 5 years.
Wonderful. Thank you, Todd. That was very interesting. Krista?
Actually, Michael
Oh,
was
it's sorry,
before me.
Michael. Oh, sorry.
Do you want me to go ahead, Michael? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll go ahead and go. Thank you, Julie. And thanks again to the EAC for the opportunity today to talk. I think regarding water, there's a lot of reasons to be positive about the direction that we're going there. If we look specifically at the conventional agriculture side, we have there's been a huge increase in the knowledge and acceptance of conservation practices within the agricultural community. You cannot pick up a farm magazine and see something about cover crops or something about nutrient management. I mean, it is absolutely there. And so it's just really at this point, the delivery of those practices on the ground. And so that streamlined, that needs to be a little better streamlined on various forms, but everybody's at the table talking about it. And I think there's a real positive outlook there. Technology has certainly helped. There's a lot of programs and other tools out there that farmers can use to see how their crop is doing with drones and also LiDAR, things like that. They can add nutrients where it's most needed, and they can determine parts of their farms that aren't productive, and perhaps they can put that in some sort of set-aside program. We have some improved levels of incentives for conservation practices. Some of that isn't as good as it used to be, but we'll always fight for a strong conservation title. I've been very impressed with some of the innovation regarding green infrastructure in our urban areas. I think Normal is a great example of that. That has really improved. I see more and more opportunities for that in the future. So, and I think ultimately we've seen a lot of partnerships come together regarding water. I mean, when it comes down to it, everybody drinks, everybody breathes, everybody has to eat. So everybody's got a place at the table to really move forward in this. This is a universal issue, and everybody needs to be there to be a part of the solution. So some of our challenges are going to be, which I don't want to take any of Michael's thunder away at all, but climate change is certainly going to be an issue regarding water quality. We have more water coming down faster than ever, specifically here in the Midwest, and that will likely only get a little worse. So that really is some of the biggest struggles with trying to keep our nutrients where they are on the landscape. So learning how to deal with that increasing uncertainty, the climate change is certainly a challenge. And of course, politics, you know, that we need consistent bipartisan support for clean water. And so, and like we said before, that's really, everybody needs to be at the table for that. And so, but we're seeing that happen. And I think there's a lot of reasons to stay positive for water conservation. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krista. Okay, Michael. Michael there?
He's going to go last, he said.
He said he's going to go last.
Me
Thank
go
you. Okay, then we'll move to Tara.
Hi. I'll just be very brief because I need to get outside, but I would encourage everybody to get outside and plant something for Earth Day and for food security. Looking at the future, I still see that bifurcated path of larger, more industrial, more polluting is still going fairly strong, even though there are conservation practices, which is a bright light. On the other hand, consumer awareness of local food is getting higher and higher. So we're having that positive. And if people can just continue that and lobby for that through Illinois Stewardship Alliance and other methods, National Sustainable Ag Coalition is another good place. We can make changes, but I think that in your personal life, you can grow your pot of basil, you can plant your tomato plant shortly. There's nothing better for your sort of psychological, emotional, and physical health, I think, than to get outside in the sunshine and your hands in the dirt. So that's something we can all do even through COVID. And also remember who was feeding you during the times of crisis and continue to support those people. Hopefully when this crisis passes at some point, those people are still there and still need your support. They were there for you when the crisis happened, and you got to be there for them all the time. Because there will be another crisis. It might be trade wars, it might be climate change related, it could be another virus. There will be another crisis. We do need local food. Those are the people we can count on. So keep supporting them throughout the future. And in the next 10 years, I hope that if we do this again, we'll say that the local food system and number of people supporting it have increased steadily. So thanks a lot. I'm going to go outside and plant something.
Thank you very much, Tara. Okay, so I think we're going to turn this over to Michael to close everything out. And before we do that, I would like to thank all of our panelists. I know he's going to do this as well, but I just want to say this has been very interesting, very uplifting, actually, to hear you talk about all of the activities that have been happening in the past 50 years, as well as the potential of how we're making progress and we're moving forward. And thank you for the optimism So with that, thank you again, Michael, for hosting this. And thank you to everybody who is on the Facebook or Zoom with us. Really appreciate that I've been a part of this. And I'm going to turn it over to Michael now to close up. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Julie. And so just real quick to close up on climate, obviously, I mean, climate plays into all of these topics that we've talked about. And while, you know, while we try not to be too political, obviously the national administration right now is not very friendly on climate or the environment. And so if we're going to tackle these issues, you know, that likely depends on, you know, some changes there. But thankfully, leadership is being taken on the state level and on the local level. Actually, mayors across the United States have long, you know, led the charge on addressing climate change. And thankfully, here locally, we do have, you know, strong support on addressing this issue from the municipalities of Bloomington and of Normal. They're both very concerned about climate change and making sure we're doing what we can, both to reduce our impact, but also to be properly prepared. And so I think there is good initiatives underway, but we all need to do a lot more in order to properly address climate change before the impacts are incredibly significant. So just very briefly on that. And I do want to just point out, so there's a lot of questions we received that we have not gotten to. Those of you who are submitting those and haven't got an answer, if you don't mind messaging us, you know, privately, your email address, we can try and get back to you or direct your question to the appropriate panelist here so you can get an answer. Our apologies, we're not able to reach all of those during our limited time here today, but we do want to answer your questions. So please, before we're done here or afterwards via, you know, Facebook, if you can reiterate your question with your contact information, we will get back to you. So thank you for that. And yeah, there was one, you know, question as well that's been shared with me about what can people who have really limited options really do to make a difference. And so one example is renters, you know, who are not property owners, who may not have curbside recycling services. They do not have room to compost in their backyard. They don't have a lot of options to get involved. And so to this, the shorter answer is talk to us at the EAC. We have a lot of programs that we might be able to help you with. If we can't help you directly, we have a lot of partners in the community who might be able to help you. And so here on this panel, we're just a few of our partners in the community who are working hard on environmental issues and other important issues right now. This community is really built upon partnerships. And so if we can't help you, we hopefully know somebody who can, or maybe know somebody who has ideas on how to build a new partnership in order to address other needs that are not being met. So please reach out to us directly. And that's what we're here for. That's what, you know, our agency is here for, and so many other nonprofit, governmental, and private groups as well, is really to meet the needs of our community. So please do reach out to us. And just thank you to everybody who participated here. Really appreciate your ability to help, you know, paint a picture for the community, where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. Thank you to everybody who's been watching from home and participating, submitting questions. I hope this has been insightful and educational for everybody. But yes, it looks like it might rain here later today. And so as Tara's already, you know, bailed to go take advantage of the lovely weather before it does, I encourage everybody else to do so as well. Get out, take a walk, keep your distance from people, wear a mask, do all the safe things to stay safe and healthy and protect others as well. But at the same time, it's Earth Day, get outside. So
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Happy Earth Day, everybody.
Thank you. Happy Earth Day.